There's a wedding in Cebu this Saturday evening, in a five-star ballroom overlooking the Mactan Channel, and at 7:47 in the evening, a man in a navy suit will stand up in front of 300 guests holding a glass of champagne that he will never drink. His name is Desmond Kavanaugh. He is a naval architect from Charleston, South Carolina. He is, by every outward measure, the happiest man in the room. His bride is radiant. Her family is weeping with joy. The sunset over the Visayan Sea is the kind of sunset that wedding planners cannot guarantee and that the atmosphere of the tropics occasionally provides without an invoice. What none of those 300 guests know is that Desmond Kavanaugh has spent the last 11 days rewriting the speech he is about to give. What none of them know is that the man standing at the head table is not the groom anymore. He stopped being the groom on a Thursday night on the 5th-floor balcony of this same resort, when he overheard a conversation through a decorative lattice panel. He stopped being the groom when he heard a sentence spoken in a language his bride did not know he understood. Tonight, the vessel he has spent 2 years building will be publicly inspected. The inspection will take approximately 17 minutes. The failure report will be read aloud. And by the time the champagne glass is set down, still untouched, still full, 300 guests will have witnessed something that the Cebuano community will speak of in hushed tones for years afterward. Not because it was loud, not because it was violent, but because it was precise. This is the story of the most controlled detonation I have ever encountered on this channel. And the man who built it had no idea, 11 days earlier, that he was capable of building it at all. I want to thank a viewer named Desmond for writing to me. His message arrived in my inbox months after the events he described. And what struck me first was not the content of what he wrote, but the tone. There was no rage in it. There was no self-pity in it. There was the clean, ordered prose of a man who had processed what happened to him, the way he processes everything, as a system to be analyzed, understood, and, where necessary, condemned. He asked me to share his story not because he wanted sympathy, but because he believed there were other men watching this channel who were standing on their own balconies right now, listening to their own lattices, and who did not yet know that the walls in their lives were not as solid as they appeared. My name is Desmond Kavanaugh, and I want to tell you what happens when an engineer falls in love with a woman who forgets that engineers inspect. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the balcony, not to the ballroom, to Charleston, South Carolina, in the autumn of a year that felt, to me, like the year my life had quietly come apart and been reassembled into something that functioned but did not satisfy. I grew up in North Charleston. Not the Charleston of horse-drawn carriages and cobblestone streets and southern belles and white dresses at the yacht club. The other Charleston, the Charleston of shipyards and logistics terminals, and the specific, biracial, working-class neighborhoods that produce men who know how to weld a seam and hold a grudge, and keep both to themselves for as long as the situation requires. My father, Earl, was a master shipfitter at the old naval shipyard. My mother, Gloria, drove a school bus for 31 years. They raised my two sisters and me in a 3-bedroom house in Ladson, with the specific, uncompromising discipline of a woman who had driven 40 other people's children through morning traffic every weekday and considered the management of her own 3 to be a comparatively simple problem of routing and schedule. My mother told me, when I was 9 years old and had come home crying because a white boy at school had called me a name I will not repeat in this telling, the thing that has followed me for the entire remainder of my life. She pulled me by the shoulders, she looked into my face, and she said, "Desmond Kavanaugh, you stand up straight in this world, because this world will try to make you small, and you are not small." She said it once. She did not repeat it. She did not need to. I have been standing up straight for 39 years because my mother, a school bus driver with a high school education and the spine of a column of reinforced concrete, told me to. I became an engineer because I liked the way things held together. I liked the way a structure, properly designed, could withstand forces that looked, from the outside, impossible to survive. I liked the mathematics of it, the logic of it, the fact that a well-designed hull either sailed or it didn't, and there was no room for argument, no room for feelings, no room for the specific, corrosive ambiguity that ran through so much of the rest of life. I went to a state university. I worked in shipyards through my 20s. I earned my master's degree at night. By the time I was 32, I had transitioned into the design office of a mid-sized naval architecture firm called Atlantic Maritime Design Group, and I had found the work I would do for the rest of my career. I married a woman named Andrea when I was 34. She was a logistics coordinator I met at an industry conference in Houston. She was smart, she was funny, she was kind, and she was ambitious in a way that I admired and eventually could not keep pace with. After 4 years of marriage, she received a career opportunity in Seattle. I could not follow her. My work was anchored to the southeast. My mother was in the early stages of dementia and needed me close. The divorce was amicable, in the way that divorces between two adults who respect each other can be amicable. She did not ask for alimony. I did not offer any. We exchanged Christmas cards. The cards were warm. The cards contained the specific, measured affection of two people who had loved each other enough to marry and not quite enough to survive the geography of American ambition. I was 42 when the divorce finalized. I moved into a smaller house on James Island, across the Ashley River from downtown. I cooked for myself. I read at night. I went to work in the morning. I visited my mother at the memory care facility every Sunday, and I watched, over the course of 5 years, as she forgot my face, then my name, then the fact that she had ever had a son at all. The silence in the James Island house became a specific kind of silence. It was not the silence of grief. It was the silence of a man whose world had contracted to the exact dimensions of his work and his mother's remaining days, and the specific manageable routine that he had constructed to carry him through both. I met Francine Delgado 2 years before the wedding, at a project dinner in Cebu. Atlantic Maritime Design Group had contracted with a shipyard in Mactan to provide structural design services for a new class of offshore support vessel. I was the lead naval architect on the project, which meant I flew to Cebu 3 or 4 times a year for design reviews and construction milestone inspections. The shipyard's management had arranged a welcome dinner at a high-end restaurant in Cebu City. My team was seated at a long table. The shipyard's executives were seated across from us. And in the middle of the table, between 2 shipyard vice presidents, was a young Filipino woman who had been introduced to me by her full name, Francine Delgado, and who had asked me, as the appetizers arrived, what a naval architect actually did. I told her in the specific abbreviated way that engineers tell civilians about their work, the way that assumes the listener will nod politely and change the subject within 30 seconds. She did not change the subject. She asked a follow-up question. Then another. She asked about the difference between a hull designer and a structural engineer. She asked about the specific challenges of designing for tropical waters versus North Atlantic conditions. She asked whether I had ever worked on the specific class of vessel the shipyard was currently building. The questions were intelligent. The questions were specific. The questions were, I would later realize, the questions of a woman who had done her research before she walked into the restaurant and who was executing a prepared list with the specific, frictionless precision of a professional who had spent 6 years managing the expectations of American customers over the telephone. Her name was Francine. She preferred to be called Frankie. She was 30 years old, born and raised in Mandaue City, the industrial sister city of Cebu, known for its furniture export factories and the specific, pragmatic commercialism of a population that had been converting raw materials into finished products since before the Spanish arrived. She was the eldest of 4 children. Her father, Edgar, was a foreman at a furniture company. Her mother, Milagros, was a public school teacher. She had attended the University of San Carlos on an academic merit scholarship, graduated with honors in business management, and spent the 6 years since graduation working for a business process outsourcing company in the Cebu IT Park. At the time we met, she was an operations supervisor, which meant she managed a team of 23 agents who answered phone calls from American customers complaining about their cell phone bills. She was beautiful. I should say that, because it was true, and because the failure to say it would dishonor the reality of what happened to me. She was beautiful in the specific way that Cebuano women are beautiful. Fine features, dark hair worn long, skin the color of wet sandalwood. A smile that she deployed with the measured deliberation of a woman who understood that a smile is a currency and that currencies lose value when they are spent too freely. She was not the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She was the most interested woman I had ever met. We exchanged numbers that night. She messaged me the following morning to thank me for the conversation and to ask whether I would be in Cebu long enough to have coffee. I would be. We had coffee. Then dinner. Then, on my next trip 3 weeks later, an afternoon at a beach resort in Lapu-Lapu City where we walked the shoreline, and she asked me about my mother, about Andrea, about Charleston, about the specific quiet of a life that I had not described to another person in over 2 years. I told her everything. I told her because she asked, and because she listened, and because the specific attention she paid me was the first attention I had received from a woman who was not a colleague, or a nurse, or a bus driver's memory of a son she no longer recognized. I fell in love with her. I should say that too. I did not fall in love with a plan. I did not fall in love with a fantasy. I fell in love with a woman who asked me what I did for a living and listened to the answer. And the listening was the thing that did it, because the listening was the thing I had been starving for and had not known I was starving for until I received it across a table in a restaurant in Cebu City. We dated for 19 months. I flew to Cebu every 6 weeks. She flew to Manila once to meet me at a hotel for a long weekend when I was transiting through. We talked every day on a messaging application. I watched her on a small video screen in my kitchen in Charleston while I cooked dinner and she ate breakfast. She watched me on a small video screen in her bedroom in Mandaue while I ate dinner and she got ready for her night shift at the call center. I met her family over a video call. Her father, Edgar, spoke limited English but shook his finger at the camera in a way that I interpreted as protective affection. Her mother Milagros spoke better English and asked me directly whether my intentions were serious. I said they were. They were. I proposed on a Tuesday evening in Cebu, on the rooftop of the hotel where we had spent our first weekend together. I had the ring in my pocket. I had the speech memorized. She cried. She said yes. She called her mother immediately, and I listened to a conversation in Cebuano that I understood perhaps 40% of, and the percentage I understood contained nothing that alarmed me, because the conversation was exactly the conversation a woman has with her mother after the man she loves has asked her to marry him. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I was not naive. I was not stupid. I was not a lonely old man seduced by a young Filipino woman who had seen my bank account across the room. I was a 47-year-old naval architect with a master's degree and a professional reputation and 2 years of careful, verified dating behind me. And I believed, with the full confidence of a man whose profession trains him to identify false structures, that the structure I had built with Frankie was true. I was wrong. I was wrong in a very specific way, which is what this story is about. The wedding was scheduled for the following April. We chose Shangri-La's Mactan Resort and Spa for the venue because it was the finest resort on the island and because I, the man who designs vessels, understood that a wedding is itself a vessel, and a vessel must be built to the highest standard available if it is to survive its maiden voyage. The total cost of the wedding came to approximately $68,000. I paid for all of it. I did not discuss the payment as a negotiation. I discussed it as a fact. I was a 47-year-old American engineer marrying into a Filipino family whose combined annual income was less than the catering budget, and the transfer of resources from one side of the marriage to the other was the specific, unspoken agreement that underwrote the entire arrangement. I did not resent the cost. I considered it an investment. The events began on a Wednesday, 4 days before the Saturday ceremony. My sister Lorraine and her husband Marcus flew in from Atlanta. My best friend and best man, Darnell Washington, a man I have known since we were both 12 years old and who I have always called D, flew in from Charleston. 3 college friends flew in from various points on the American East Coast. Frankie's family arrived en masse from Mandaue. The rehearsal dinner was held on Wednesday evening at the resort's oceanfront restaurant. 40 guests attended. I gave a short speech thanking Edgar and Milagros for raising the woman I was about to marry. Edgar shook my hand afterward with a grip that I will remember for the rest of my life. It was the grip of a father who had raised his daughter on a furniture foreman's salary and was handing her to a man who built ships, and the grip said, in a language that required no translation, "Take care of what I built." I understood the grip. I respected the grip. I intended to honor the grip. On Thursday evening, we held a family welcome party in one of the resort's function rooms. 80 guests attended. Filipino friends, co-workers, extended family members whose attendance I could not distinguish from wedding crashing, but whose presence Frankie had insisted was expected and cultural, and simply how her family did these things. I paid for the additional catering without comment. I was investing in the vessel. The party ended at 11 o'clock at night. The guests filtered to their rooms. Frankie and I returned to our suite on the 5th floor. The suite was a corner unit with a balcony that overlooked the Mactan Channel. And beyond the channel, the lights of Cebu City shimmered across the water in the specific, humid shimmer of a tropical evening in late April. Frankie told me she was going to the bathroom to remove her makeup. I told her I was going to step onto the balcony for air. The socializing had exhausted me in the way that all socializing exhausts introverts, from the inside out, and I wanted 5 minutes of silence and salt air before I slept. I stepped onto the balcony. I stood at the railing. I looked at the water. I breathed. The adjacent balcony, separated from mine by a dividing wall approximately 5 feet high, belonged to the room occupied by Frankie's younger sister, Angelica, age 26, and her cousin Joy, age 29. The dividing wall was solid from the ground to approximately 4 feet. Above the 4-foot mark, the wall became a decorative lattice panel, an open work of crossed wooden slats that had been designed to permit airflow and to provide a pleasing visual texture and, as I was about to discover, to transmit sound with the specific, unimpeded fidelity of a structure that had not been engineered for privacy. I heard voices, Angelica's and Joy's. They were speaking Cebuano. Here I must explain something. Over the 19 months of my relationship with Frankie, I had acquired a functional vocabulary of Cebuano of approximately 200 words. I could greet people. I could order food. I could comprehend simple sentences spoken at a moderate speed. I could not hold a conversation. I had not told Frankie the extent of my comprehension, because the extent of my comprehension was not impressive, and because I had not wanted to present myself as more fluent than I was. Frankie, for her part, believed that I understood perhaps 20 words of her language. She was wrong. She was wrong by a factor of 10. What I heard through the lattice over the next 9 minutes was a conversation that I understood at approximately 65% fidelity. A fidelity sufficient to capture the architecture of what was being said, if not every individual word. Angelica said something that included the words Sister Frankie and lucky. Joy laughed. Angelica continued. She said something about the shipyard dinner, about how Frankie had specifically requested to be seated near the American engineer, about how Frankie had researched my company before the dinner, about how the first question she asked me, the question about what a naval architect does, had not been spontaneous curiosity but prepared material. Joy laughed again. She said something that I only partially caught, but the words Paulo and backup were in English, because Filipinos code switch to English for technical and modern terms, and the word backup was a word that sounded the same in any language. Angelica continued. She said, slowly, with the specific cadence of a punchline, a sentence that I understood at near full comprehension, because she spoke it clearly, and because the words were words I knew. Sister Frankie was never in love with Des. She just wanted the visa and the lifestyle. Paulo is really the one she loves, Joy said in a tone that was half protest and half amusement. But Des, he is a good man. Angelica said, yes, good. And that is the problem, because he will not discover it, because he is too good. I stood at the railing. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I held the railing with both hands, the same hands that held technical drawings of hull stress distributions, the same hands my mother had told me to hold steady, because the world would try to make me small, and I was not small. I listened until the voices moved back inside and the balcony door closed and the lattice was silent. I stood at the railing for another 20 minutes. I looked at the water. I thought about the specific technical term for the part of a vessel's hull that bears the most stress during a voyage. It is called the garboard strake. The garboard strake is the plank that connects the keel to the hull, the joint that absorbs everything, the structural member at which the entire vessel's integrity is determined. If the garboard strake is false, the ship sinks. It does not matter how beautiful the deck is. It does not matter how elegantly the cabins are appointed. If the garboard strake is false, the ship is false. The garboard strake of my marriage had just been exposed as fraudulent. I went back inside the suite. Frankie was already in bed, either asleep or pretending to be asleep. I lay down beside her. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and performed the specific, methodical engineering analysis that my education and my career and my mother's discipline had prepared me to perform. Identify the failure, verify the data, model the consequences, design the response, execute. The execution would occur in approximately 11 days because the wedding had been rescheduled the previous month due to a venue conflict and now fell on the following Saturday instead of the immediate Saturday. I had 11 days. I would use all of them. I did not confront Frankie. This is the first thing you must understand about what followed. I did not pull her aside. I did not interrogate her. I did not raise my voice, change my expression, or alter my behavior in any visible way. I did nothing. Nothing is a harder discipline than most people understand. Nothing, sustained for 11 days, through a rehearsal dinner and a family welcome party and a spa morning and a wedding ceremony, is the hardest thing I have ever done with my face. During those 11 days, I performed 2 parallel operations. I called the first one confirmation. I called the second one the speech. Confirmation was the engineering requirement. My comprehension of the overheard conversation had been 65%. The remaining 35% could have contained qualifications, sarcasm, hypothetical framings, exaggerations. An engineer does not demolish a structure on the basis of partial data. An engineer verifies. I verified through 3 channels. The first channel was audio. On the Saturday morning following the balcony, while Frankie was at a bridal appointment at the resort spa, I placed my phone, set to record, inside my toiletry bag on the bathroom counter of our suite. Frankie had planned to return to the suite to meet her mother for a morning discussion before lunch. The discussion would occur within range of my recording device. It did. Frankie and Milagros sat in the suite for 8 minutes, speaking in Cebuano, drinking coffee my housekeeping service had delivered 30 minutes prior. I retrieved the phone after they left. I sent the audio file, that afternoon, to a professional translation service I located through an online directory in Cebu City. I explicitly did not use any personal contact. I used a stranger, bound by a confidentiality agreement, who would have no reason to recognize the voices and no relationship to anyone in my fiancé's world. The translation returned within 36 hours. In the conversation, Frankie and her mother discussed the post-wedding financial arrangement that Frankie had negotiated with me, a monthly transfer of $5,000 to her family to begin after the wedding. Frankie used a phrase that the translator rendered as, "Once we are in Charleston and the green card is processed, I will have more flexibility." Her mother responded with a phrase the translator rendered as, "Just make sure he does not find out about the Talisay account." The Talisay account. I had never heard of the Talisay account. Talisay is a city adjacent to Cebu City. It is also, as I would learn over the next 3 days, the hometown of a ship engineer named Paulo Villanueva. The second channel of verification was digital. Frankie and I shared a tablet in the suite, on which her social media accounts were logged in without additional authentication. On the Monday evening following my audio recording, while Frankie was attending a salon appointment with her bridal party, I read, in a single sitting of approximately 3 hours, the complete message thread between Frankie and Paulo Villanueva. The thread extended over 2 years. It predated my relationship with Frankie. It had gone quiet for approximately 12 months after we began dating. It had resumed 3 months before the wedding, when Paulo's cargo vessel docked in Singapore and he sent Frankie a congratulatory message on her engagement and asked her whether she was happy. She replied that she was, but that she was also scared. The word scared was the door. He walked through it. The conversation resumed and intensified. In a message dated 3 weeks before my arrival in Cebu, Frankie had written to Paulo a sentence that the translator, whom I consulted a second time, rendered as, "Just wait, Pau. After this, I have a plan." The third channel was financial. I hired, through my attorney in Cebu City, a former investigator of the Philippine National Bureau of Investigation who now operated a private consultancy. His name was Restituto Bangayan. He accepted the assignment on Tuesday and delivered his findings on Friday morning, 27 hours before the wedding. The findings confirmed the existence of a bank account in Talisay City, in Frankie's name, opened 14 months earlier. The account contained approximately 320,000 pesos, roughly $5,700. The deposits into the account corresponded, with almost perfect chronological fidelity, to the dates on which I had transferred supplementary funds to Frankie for what she had described as wedding preparation expenses. The investigator also confirmed that Paulo Villanueva was currently on shore leave in Talisay City, having arrived from Singapore 3 weeks earlier. He was not scheduled to attend the wedding. He was, however, in the Philippines, and he was waiting. By Friday afternoon, the day before the wedding, I had confirmed every element of what I had heard on the balcony. The confirmation was total. The data was angry for me. The data was, in fact, so angry that it no longer required me to be angry at all. Anger, in an engineer, is a failure mode. It produces poor decisions. It produces shouting matches and broken furniture, and the kind of catastrophic emotional discharges that serve the person experiencing them and no one else. I was not going to have an emotional discharge. I was going to have a controlled detonation. The second operation, the speech, had been underway in parallel since the first night on the balcony. I wrote it longhand, in a notebook I purchased at the resort gift shop. I wrote 3 drafts. I revised the 3rd draft twice. I memorized it. I did not practice it aloud because the walls of the Shangri-La Mactan, like the walls of all resort hotels, had been built for aesthetics rather than soundproofing, and because I had learned, through the lattice on the 5th floor balcony, that the assumption of privacy in a hotel room is an assumption that can fail at the most inconvenient moment. I rehearsed the speech silently. I rehearsed it on my runs along the beach at 6 o'clock in the morning. I rehearsed it in my head during the rehearsal dinner, while I was giving my first speech, the warm, short speech about Edgar and the grip of his hand. I rehearsed it in the shower. I rehearsed it in the gym. By Friday night, I could have recited it in my sleep. I should tell you that I considered at several points an alternative path. I considered calling the wedding off privately. I considered pulling Frankie aside on Friday evening and telling her what I knew and booking a flight home on Saturday morning. I considered the specific, private version of this event that would have spared 300 guests the experience they were about to receive. I rejected the alternative path, and I want to explain why, because the reasoning is the heart of this story. The plan that Frankie had built was a plan that depended, fundamentally, on one assumption, that I was too good to discover it. Angelica had said it on the balcony. I was too good, too trusting, too decent, too invested, too in love. The plan was not, strictly speaking, a plan to deceive me. It was a plan to exploit a specific trait of my character, which was the trait my mother had built into me on the day she told me to stand up straight. Goodness, decency, the specific willingness to extend trust to the person I had chosen to love. A private cancellation would have confirmed the plan's internal logic. A private cancellation would have told Frankie, in the only language she understood, that I was exactly the man Angelica had described. Too good, too soft, too embarrassed to make the failure public, too invested in my own dignity to risk the humiliation of a ballroom scene. A private cancellation would have allowed the plan to rebrand itself. Frankie would have told her family a different story. She would have told Paulo a different story. She would have told herself, eventually, a different story. The plan, intact in memory, would have remained available for redeployment against the next engineer, at the next dinner, at the next shipyard. I did not want the plan to remain available. I wanted the plan to be destroyed. And the only way to destroy a plan that depended on my goodness was to reveal, in the maximum public forum, that goodness was not the same as softness. Goodness is not the absence of standards. Goodness is the application of standards so rigorous that when they are violated, the violation cannot be accommodated. I was good. I had always been good. Good was not the weakness Frankie had counted on. Good was the weapon I was about to deploy. Saturday morning arrived. I woke at 5:30. I ran on the beach for 45 minutes. I returned to the suite. I showered. I dressed in a bespoke navy suit that I had commissioned from a tailor in Charleston 6 months earlier. I drank black coffee on the balcony, on the same balcony where the lattice had changed my life, and I watched the sunrise over the Mactan Channel, and I thought about my mother. My mother had been dead 14 months by the time I stood on that balcony. She had died of dementia complications in a memory care facility in North Charleston. In her final lucid conversation with me, perhaps 3 months before she died, she had looked at my face and said, "Desmond, are you standing up straight?" I had said yes. She had said, "Good. Do not let them make you small." I was about to not be made small. My mother, if there was any part of her that still existed in the specific, non-denominational way that mothers continue to exist in the minds of their sons, would have approved. The ceremony was scheduled for 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the resort's beachfront garden. I spent the intervening hours in the quiet, methodical preparation that any significant event requires. I did not see Frankie. Tradition held that we not see each other before the ceremony. Tradition held a great many things that were about to become obsolete. 300 guests were seated in the beachfront garden at 4:45. White chairs, orchid arrangements. A string quartet I had engaged from the Cebu Philharmonic. The garden overlooked the Mactan Channel, and the sunset was arriving, and the sunset was, by any standard, spectacular. The kind of sunset that resort wedding planners cannot guarantee, and that the atmosphere of the tropics occasionally provides without invoice. Frankie walked down the aisle on her father's arm at 5 o'clock precisely. Her gown was ivory silk with a cathedral train. The gown had cost $4,000. I had paid for it. She was radiant in the specific way that all brides are radiant, from the accumulated anticipation of a ceremony that represents, in the public imagination, the beginning of something permanent. Frankie believed the ceremony was the beginning of something permanent. She was correct. She was simply wrong about what it was the beginning of. I stood at the altar in my navy suit. My sister Lorraine would tell me afterward that I had looked, in that moment, like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. She was correct. I was exactly where I wanted to be. The precision of my position, spatial and emotional and strategic, was the product of 11 days of engineering. We exchanged vows. I spoke the standard vows without modification, delivered with composure. She spoke hers. She cried during hers. The crying was real, or it was performed so effectively that the distinction was irrelevant. The officiant, a Catholic priest from Mandaue, whom Frankie's family had known for 20 years, pronounced us married. We kissed. The 300 guests applauded. The string quartet played. The sunset reached its peak intensity. We were married. The marriage would last approximately 2 hours and 47 minutes. The reception began at 6 o'clock in the grand ballroom. Dinner was served, a 5-course Filipino Western fusion menu that I had approved at approximately $140 per guest. Champagne was poured. The professional events host, whom Frankie had engaged from Cebu City, performed the expected introductions of the bridal party and the first dance and the specific ritualized sequence of events that structure the opening hour of every wedding reception in the world. At 7:47, the MC announced the groom's speech. The room quieted. 300 guests turned their attention to the head table. Edgar and Milagros were in the front row. Angelica and Joy were at the bridal party table, seated adjacent to each other, both of them wearing the specific, luminous expressions of women who believe themselves to be witnessing a triumph. D. Washington was at his best man station. My sister Lorraine was at the family table. 250 additional friends, relatives, colleagues, and acquaintances filled the ballroom to its capacity. I stood. I held a champagne glass. I did not hold notes. The speech was memorized. The delivery was calibrated. 11 days of preparation had compressed into 17 minutes of controlled architecture. I began by thanking the guests for their attendance. I thanked Edgar and Milagros for raising a remarkable woman. I addressed Edgar directly. I told him that the grip of his hand at the rehearsal dinner had told me everything I needed to know about how much he loved his daughter. I told him that I respected him. I told him that what I was about to say was not directed at him or at his wife, that they were good people, that they deserved better than what was coming, and that I was sorry they would have to hear it in this room rather than in a private conversation. I told him that privacy had not been made available to me. The truth had been kept private by someone else, and the only way to make it public was here, in front of the people who had witnessed the promise I had just spoken. The room was still. The stillness was the specific stillness that precedes weather. I told them about ships. I told them that I had been designing ships for 22 years. I told them that the most important part of a ship was the part the passengers never saw, which was the keel. I told them that everything else was built on the keel. I told them that if the keel was true, the ship sailed, and that if the keel was false, the ship sank, and that it did not matter how beautiful the deck was or how elegantly the cabins were furnished. A ship with a false keel is a false ship. I paused. I looked at Frankie. She was smiling, the smile she had prepared for this moment, the smile of a bride hearing her husband's toast, the smile that was still operating under the assumption that the speech was going to be about love. I told them that 11 days ago, I had stood on a balcony at this resort. I told them that the balcony adjacent to mine had been occupied by two people I cared about, two people I was about to name. I told them that those two people had been having a conversation, and that they had not known I could hear them, and that they had been speaking Cebuano, and that they had not known I understood Cebuano. I told them carefully that my comprehension was not fluent, but was sufficient. Sufficient to hear the word plan, sufficient to hear the word backup, sufficient to hear a name, Paulo, that I had not previously heard, and sufficient to hear a sentence that I had, over the course of the intervening 11 days, confirmed, translated, and verified through 3 independent channels. I spoke the sentence. I spoke it first in Cebuano, as close to the phrasing I had heard as I could remember. Then I spoke it in English. Sister Frankie was never in love with Des. She just wanted the visa and the lifestyle. Paulo is really the one she loves. The room changed. The change was physical. A collective intake of breath altered the air pressure in the ballroom, the way a hull breach alters the pressure in a ship's compartment. 300 people simultaneously understood that the speech was not a toast. It was a detonation, and they were inside the blast radius. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I had rehearsed the remainder of the speech for 11 days, and I delivered it now with the calibrated precision of a man reading a structural failure report to a panel of shipyard executives. I told them about the audio recording. I told them about the professional translator. I told them about the bank account in Talisay City, in Frankie's name, opened 14 months earlier, containing approximately $5,700 in funds that had been transferred from monies I had provided for wedding expenses. I told them about the message thread with Paulo Villanueva, the ship engineer currently on shore leave in Talisay, who had received 3 weeks before this wedding. The message, "Just wait, Pau. After this, I have a plan." Frankie's face had emptied. I had seen human faces undergo many transformations in my life, but I had not seen before the specific, total evacuation that occurred on Frankie's face between minute 11 and minute 12 of my speech. It was the face of a woman whose every version of herself was collapsing simultaneously into the single version the moment required, which was the version that had been caught. I turned to Edgar. I told him, directly, that I meant what I had said, that he and Milagros were good people, that they had raised 4 children on a foreman's salary and a teacher's salary, and that this was harder than anything I had ever done in my life. I told him that I did not hold him responsible for what his daughter had planned. I told him that I held myself responsible for not having discovered it sooner. I told him that the $68,000 I had spent on this wedding was not a debt between us. It was the cost of my education. And I told him that I had been educated. Edgar's face was the face of a man who had just learned that the building he had helped construct had been built on someone else's blueprints. Milagros was weeping into her napkin. I turned away from them because continuing to address them would have been an additional cruelty, and because the remainder of the speech was not for them. I addressed the 300 guests. I apologized to them for the way I had chosen to do this. I told them that I had considered a private cancellation. I told them I had rejected that option for one specific reason, which I then explained. The plan had been built on the assumption that I would never discover it. That I was, in Angelica's words, too good to discover it. I told them that I was good. I was also an engineer, and engineers inspect. When I inspect a hull and find a false keel, I do not quietly note the deficiency and allow the ship to sail. I red tag the vessel. I halt the launch. I make the failure visible, not to humiliate the builder, but to protect the people who would have sailed on it. I was red tagging this vessel. The launch was halted. The failure was visible. I picked up the champagne glass. I raised it. I addressed Frankie directly for the first time in the speech. I told her that I hoped Paolo was the man she said he was. I told her that I hoped the plan she had built would work. I told her that I hoped the life she constructed after this day would be the life she had wanted. I told her that I would not wish her ill. I also told her that I would not wish her well. I would wish her what I wished every vessel I inspected: structural integrity. She was, I told her, going to need it. I set the glass down. I had not drunk from it. The glass remained full. The fullness was a detail. An engineer understands that vessels are defined by what they contain and by what they refuse to contain. And the glass I set down on that table was a vessel I had refused to contain the celebration of a fraud. I walked away from the head table. I walked through the ballroom. I walked past 300 silent guests. I walked past the string quartet, which had stopped playing at some point during the speech without my having noticed. I walked past the 5-tier wedding cake, which stood on its table like a monument to a ceremony that had lasted less than 3 hours. D. Washington fell into step beside me. We walked out of the ballroom together. 2 black men from North Charleston walking through the lobby of a 5-star resort in Cebu at 8:15 on a Saturday evening. One in a bespoke Navy suit and the other in a rented tuxedo. Neither of us speaking, because the speech had said everything, and the silence that followed was not the absence of words, but the presence of a decision that had been made, executed, and completed with the structural precision of a man who builds things that do not fail. We went to the bar in the lobby. D. ordered 2 whiskeys, neat. He pushed one toward me. He said quietly, "Brother, I do not know what to say." I said, "You do not have to say anything." He said, "That was the hardest thing I have ever watched anyone do." I said, "It was the hardest thing I have ever done." We drank. We did not speak for a long time. Eventually D said, "Your mother would be proud." I said, "I hope so." He said, "I know so." I flew back to Charleston the following morning on the first available flight. Frankie did not come to my room that night. She did not call. She did not message. What she did, I learned later through channels I did not seek, was sit in the head table at the ballroom for approximately 20 minutes after my departure, unable to move, while her father placed his hand on her shoulder in the specific gesture of a man who does not yet know what to say. The guests had filed out slowly, in small groups, in the particular stunned silence of people who have just witnessed something they did not know was possible and will not be able to describe later in terms that do justice to what they saw. The aftermath unfolded over the subsequent months with the specific, bureaucratic efficiency of a legal process that had been prepared in advance. My attorney in Cebu City, a man named Honesto Villaruel, filed the annulment petition the following Monday. The grounds were fraud and misrepresentation of intent, supported by a documentary package that included the translated audio conversation, the screenshots of the Paolo message thread, and the financial investigator's report on the Talisay account. Philippine annulment is a lengthy process, typically requiring 2 to 5 years. But the strength of the evidentiary package, combined with the fact that the marriage had not been consummated, positioned the case favorably. I had informed the resort staff of the situation immediately after the speech and had been moved to a separate room for the wedding night, which I spent drinking water and reading a novel I had brought for the flight home and which I finished at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, local time. Frankie did not contest the annulment. Her attorney, retained by Edgar and paid for from Edgar's personal savings, communicated to my attorney that Frankie would cooperate fully. The cooperation was the only strategically rational choice. Contesting the annulment would have required her to argue that the marriage was genuine, which would have required her to explain the Paolo messages and the Talisay account under oath in a Philippine court. The cooperation was not contrition. It was the final calculation in a sequence of calculations that had begun 2 years earlier at a shipyard dinner and had ended, approximately, on a balcony with a latticed wall. The immigration attorney in Charleston withdrew the K-1 visa application on the following Monday afternoon. Frankie's path to the United States closed in a filing that took 11 minutes to process, and that ended a plan that had taken 2 years to construct. I should tell you about Frankie. I do not take pleasure in what happened to her. I have said this to Dee, to my sister, to the therapist I have been seeing for approximately a year, and now to you. I did not want Frankie to suffer. I did not want her family to suffer. I wanted the vessel to be red tagged. I wanted the plan to be destroyed. I wanted the specific assumption that I was too good to discover the truth to be publicly, permanently, unrecoverably refuted. Frankie's suffering was a consequence of those goals, not a goal in itself. She returned to Mandaue. She moved back into her parents' house, the house with the unfinished second floor that Edgar had been building incrementally over 15 years. She returned to her job at the call center. She was demoted from operations supervisor to team leader, not as a consequence of the wedding, but because she had taken a 2-week leave for the ceremony and her position had been filled in her absence, and the filling had become permanent by the time she tried to return to it. She took the lower position. She had no alternative. Paulo Villanueva contacted her after the wedding. He had seen a video of the speech, which had been recorded by a guest and had circulated on a Cebuano social media group and had accumulated 47,000 views within its first week of existence. He sent her a message that said, in translation, "Frankie, I heard what happened. I am here. Whatever you need." She replied, "I need to be alone, Pau, please." He respected the request for approximately 3 weeks before messaging her again. She blocked him. The blocking was not dramatic. It was administrative. The backup vendor had been decommissioned. The primary vendor had red-tagged the vessel. There was no vessel remaining to supply. 6 months after the wedding, Frankie said a thing to her cousin Joy, which Joy repeated to Angelica, which Angelica eventually repeated to Edgar, which Edgar eventually, in a roundabout way that passed through 3 intermediaries, communicated to D. Washington, who repeated it to me one evening on his back porch in Charleston over the whiskey we had begun drinking together on alternate Fridays. Frankie had said, "He did what I would have done. If I were the engineer and he were the one with the plan, I would have inspected the hull too. I just did not think he would inspect. I thought he was too good." Angelica was right. He was too good. But too good does not mean too stupid. I forgot that. I forgot that good people also have standards. And standards are not the same as kindness. Standards are the keel, and the keel was his, not mine. I do not know what to make of this statement. I do not know whether it is remorse or self-justification or the specific Filipino form of accountability that acknowledges a failure without quite apologizing for it. I have decided, after considerable thought, that it does not matter what to make of it. The statement is hers. The consequences are hers. The remainder of her life is hers. I have no further business with any of it. Edgar retired early from the furniture company. He told Milagros, in a conversation that their neighbor overheard through the thin walls of the Mandaue subdivision, a sentence that has stayed with me since the day D related to me. Edgar had said, "I shook that man's hand. I gave him my grip. He honored my grip. My daughter did not honor his." Edgar, on his own initiative, insisted on returning the $5,700 that Frankie had accumulated in the Telesay account. He transferred the funds through my attorney without my having requested it. He sent a brief note with the transfer. The note said, "This belongs to you. I am sorry." The note was signed only with his first name, Edgar. I have kept the note. It is in a drawer in my study in Charleston, in a folder that contains, among other items, the last Christmas card my mother ever signed, and a photograph of my father at the shipyard in 1987. Angelica has not apologized to Frankie. Frankie has not asked her to. I have thought about Angelica more than I expected to. In the months since the wedding, Angelica did nothing wrong. She spoke the truth in what she believed was a private conversation, in a language she believed her sister's fiancé did not understand, on a balcony whose acoustic properties she had not evaluated. The truth she spoke was not her fault. The saying of it was not her fault. The hearing of it was not her fault. The lattice was the lattice. And the lattice was present in every wall of every building and every relationship and every life that any of us had ever constructed. The lattice had simply become visible, in her sister's case, at the specific angle at which the light had happened to fall. I am 48 years old now. I live in Charleston. I have returned to my work at Atlantic Maritime Design Group. I completed the Cebu shipyard project, the same project that had placed me at the dinner where Frankie had asked her prepared question. The vessel I designed for that project was launched 9 months after the wedding. It sails now in the waters of the South China Sea. serving offshore oil platforms, doing the work I designed it to do. I have not returned to the Philippines. I have not returned to dating websites. I have returned to the thing I do best, which is that I design. I am currently leading the structural design for a new class of offshore support vessel that will operate in deep water, under extreme pressure, in conditions that test every joint, every frame, every weld. The vessel will be built to withstand forces that would destroy a lesser structure. I know this because I have designed it. I have inspected every line. I have verified every specification. I have checked the keel. I have learned, through the unwanted education that the last 2 years provided me, a number of things that I want to share with you now, not because I want to offer advice. I am not in a position to offer advice. I am a man who failed to detect a fraud that was executed against him over a period of 2 years, and the failure of that detection is not a credential. I am in a position, however, to describe what I have learned, for whatever value the description provides to anyone watching this who is standing on their own balcony, listening to their own lattice. The first thing I learned is that the assumption of privacy is the most dangerous assumption available to the human mind. We all assume that the walls around us are solid. The walls are not solid. The walls are latticed. The pattern is usually not visible because the light is usually not falling at the right angle, but the pattern is there, and when the angle changes, the pattern becomes visible all at once. You cannot prevent the angle from changing. You can only prepare for the possibility that when it does, what you hear through your lattice will be the most important thing you ever hear. The second thing I learned is that goodness is not the weakness that manipulators assume it is. Manipulators, including the woman I almost married, operate on the theory that good people are soft people, that good people will not inspect, that good people will not verify, that good people, confronted with evidence of betrayal, will choose private shame over public accountability, because the public accountability would embarrass them. This theory is wrong. Good people have standards. Standards are not the same as kindness. Standards are the specific structural members that bear the weight of a good person's willingness to love another person. When the standards are violated, the willingness collapses. The collapse is not cruelty. The collapse is physics. A good person who tolerates a violation of their standards is not a good person. They are a softened version of a good person who has chosen, for reasons of comfort or cowardice, to accept a fraudulent structure. I am not that version. I was never going to be that version. My mother built the other version, and the other version held. The third thing I learned is that revenge is not the correct word for what I did. I have used the word once or twice in casual conversation, because the word is available, and because other people use the word, and because correcting their vocabulary is a form of pedantry I try to avoid. But the word is wrong. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is hot. Revenge is the specific, chaotic discharge of an injury that the injured person could not contain. What I did was structural. What I did was inspection. I did not punish Frankie. I inspected the marriage. I found a false keel, and I red tagged the vessel before it sailed. The red tagging was public because the vessel was public. 300 guests, a 5-star resort, a $68,000 ceremony. You cannot quietly decommission a ship that 300 people have watched being launched. The public nature of the wedding demanded the public nature of the cancellation. The cancellation was not revenge. It was quality control. The fourth thing I learned is that the full champagne glass matters. I have thought about the glass more than I expected to. The glass sat on that head table for the duration of my speech, and it was still sitting there, untouched, when I walked out of the ballroom. It contained champagne I had paid for. It contained the ritual expectation of a celebration I had refused to perform. The glass was a vessel. I did not drink from it because the drinking would have meant participating in the fraud. Setting the glass down, full, was the final act of the speech. It was the final structural statement. I did not consume this celebration. I did not participate in this deception. I held the truth. I held the glass. I set them both down, untouched, because the truth and the celebration cannot occupy the same vessel. One of them was false, and an engineer does not drink from a false vessel. I keep, in my study in Charleston, a small watercolor painting of a ship. The ship is a cargo vessel of a class I helped design 15 years ago. The painting was a gift from a colleague. The ship in the painting is sailing through calm waters under a clear sky. The ship is intact. The keel is true. The garboard strake is sound. The vessel is doing what vessels are meant to do, which is to carry the people and the cargo entrusted to it across distances that would be impossible to traverse without the specific, engineered integrity of the hull. I look at the painting sometimes, in the evenings, while I eat dinner alone in my kitchen. I do not look at it with sadness. I look at it with satisfaction. The vessel in the painting is the vessel I designed. The vessel I designed sails. The vessel I almost married did not. My mother, Gloria Kavanaugh, died 14 months before the wedding. She did not know about Frankie. She did not know about the ceremony. She did not know about the speech. She died in a memory care facility in North Charleston, in a small room with a single window that overlooked a parking lot, holding my hand and calling me by my father's name. 2 weeks before she died, on one of her last lucid days, she opened her eyes and she looked at me and she said, "Desmond, are you standing up straight?" I said, "Yes, Mama, I am standing up straight." She said, "Good. Do not let them make you small." I did not let them. I want you to know that. I want her to know it. Whatever remains of her knows anything. Her son stood up straight in a ballroom in Cebu, and he delivered a speech that made him, briefly, larger than he had ever been. And the largeness was not cruelty, and it was not revenge. It was the specific, load-bearing largeness of a man who refused to be made small by a woman who had underestimated the only trait his mother had ever asked him to protect. I am still building. There will be other vessels. There may be other women. There may not be. I do not know. What I know is that the next vessel I am party to, whether it is a ship in the yard or a marriage in a ballroom, will have a true keel. I will inspect it myself. I will verify every plank. I will check the garboard strake. And when I am certain, when the data confirms that the structure is sound and the foundation is honest, and the woman at the altar is not a plan but a person, then I will drink the champagne. All of it. The glass will be empty because the vessel will be real. And real vessels deserve to be celebrated. That one, in a ballroom in Cebu, on a Saturday evening in April, did not deserve to be celebrated. So I set the glass down. I walked out. I flew home. The champagne is still ready. I am still waiting. And when the next vessel comes, I will know. Because I will have checked. Because I am an engineer. Because my hands were built to build things and to inspect things and to set down glasses that should not be drunk and to pick up glasses that should be. And because my mother, a school bus driver from Ladson, South Carolina, with a high school education and a spine of reinforced concrete, told her 9-year-old son that he was not small. And he has never, not for one day, not for 1 hour, not for one single minute in a ballroom in Cebu in front of 300 guests, allowed anyone to prove her wrong. I am Desmond Kavanaugh. I design ships for a living. I do not design them to fail. If you have made it to the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for sitting with a story that does not have a conventional ending. The conventional ending of a love scam story is that the victim loses everything, learns the painful lesson, and slowly rebuilds over years of quiet grief. I did not lose everything. I lost $68,000, which was recoverable, and I lost 2 years of my life, which was not. I did not rebuild in grief. I rebuilt in the specific, methodical silence of a man who had performed an inspection, had found a structural failure, and had filed the appropriate paperwork. I am not grieving. I am working. The working is the thing that saves me, as it has always been the thing that has saved me. And I recommend it to any man watching this who finds himself, for whatever reason, in a position where the vessel he thought he was launching turns out to have a false keel. Inspect. Verify. And when you are certain, red tag the vessel. Do it publicly if the vessel is public. Do it privately if the vessel is private. Do it with precision. Do it without shouting. Do it without apology. And then walk out of the ballroom, or the bedroom, or the hotel suite, or wherever the decommissioning occurs, and build the next thing better. That is what my hands were built to do. That is what I am still doing. That is what I will continue to do until the day I die, or until the day I find the vessel worthy of the champagne in the glass I am still holding. If this story has meant something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment with the name of the country you are watching from, and sharing this with anyone you know who might be standing on their own balcony right now, listening to their own lattice, waiting for the light to fall at the angle that will show them the pattern in their own walls. My name is Desmond Kavanaugh. I stood up straight. I did not let them make me small. And somewhere in Charleston, in a small room with a single window, my mother, I believe, is smiling.